Well, joining me now to talk more about Saudi Arabia's economy is Joel Rubins, the president of the Washington Strategy Group and a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Rachelle.
So let's start with taking a look back at the current state of Saudi Arabia's economy. How important was this so-called Davos of the desert in terms of their economic goals?
It was a critical centerpiece. This was a forum that was designed to attract international investment and investment that would help to diversify the Saudi economy, as you laid out. Broadly speaking, the region itself is not very diverse in terms of its economic activity. There's a youth bulge. There are state-run economies that really control the kinds of ideas that these populations develop for their economies. And in Saudi Arabia, they're not lacking for capital, but what they're lacking for are opportunities for the young people, having technology come into the country and open up their society so they can really create industries of the future. That's what they want to do. This conference is supposed to help attract that kind of industry. And really, it's not seen now as something attractive, quite frankly, for Western companies to come to, and that's a problem for Saudi Arabia.
So as we know, when people think of the economic drivers in Saudi Arabia, oil is going to always be the first thing that comes to mind. Give us a fuller picture of some of the current economic drivers there.
Well, oil is the core economic driver, and for that economy really is driven in many ways by income that comes in through foreign exchange. But the population, I can't emphasize enough, the population is young. There's 10 million people under age 35, and they're looking to the government to provide them with public outlays, with dollars. And that means that you have a large set of the population that's not productive economically. Beyond that, with the United States, a significant amount of trade is in defense spending. So the Saudis are purchasing significant amount of material and hardware from the United States and perhaps employing people in that way, but not really generating new economic activity, as opposed to their neighbors in Bahrain, in Qatar, and other countries where they are finance centers and where they're really developing financial expertise and acumen. They haven't yet done that in Saudi Arabia.
So with that being said then, how much closer is Saudi Arabia to the Crown Prince's Vision 2030 plan?
Well, he certainly hit a major speed bump over the past several weeks. And the idea here was to take their $250 billion in sovereign wealth that they have, which is a large amount of capital, and to use that to attract Uber, to attract technology companies that would come in and invest and potentially enable them to have new opportunities for their youth. If that doesn't happen, and if the Saudis begin to look to other countries for diversification, it's going to set them back. They've also had some recent setbacks. They haven't been able to take the state oil company public. They haven't been able to do some of the things, the real nitty-gritty for an economy that's needed. But underlying that as well is the state is dominant in the economy, but there's also a lack of transparency in how it's run. And this incident with Khashoggi underlines that. The concern about transparency in the Saudi government will always inhibit international investment.
Now, obviously, we can't talk about the summit without talking about the impact that the death of Jamal Khashoggi has had. And obviously, we've seen business leaders pull out. Obviously, some wanted to stay, some deals have been made. But how do the expectations before this how has that changed since Khashoggi's death?
I think the Saudis are going to have to really look hard in the mirror and decide whether the reputational risk that they have now created for foreign investors is worth it. Right now, American companies are going to be very reticent to be seen publicly investing in Saudi Arabia. There is a lot of investment in Saudi Arabia. I don't want to mince words. Many funds, many companies in the United States, they are invested in Saudi Arabia. But going forward, to make a big public partnership is going to be very difficult. A lot of questions will be asked by shareholders. There will be a lot of concerns. So Saudi Arabia, it really is going to need to clean up the political risk associated with it and the reputational risk associated with it to really attract the next generation of investment.
And obviously, you're talking about this public reputation, but beyond the lights of the conference, how do you expect business leaders and countries to really deal with this issue of trying to coexist with their condemnation of the Khashoggi killing while trying to maintain their economic interests?
Well, this again, in the United States, certainly companies, when they're public, they respond to shareholders, they respond to the media, there's public pressure. So for an American company, it's going to make it more difficult. It's going to be very hard for the CEO of Google, or of Uber in this case, to go and say, we now have a deal with Saudi Arabia, when there's lingering question about what the rulers of Saudi Arabia are doing in the region and with their own populations. That doesn't mean, however, that the United States is the only potential investor. But the United States is still the leading innovation economy in the world, and it's the one that Saudi Arabia wants to have a partnership with. Saudi Arabia is not going to have those kinds of partners, though, if they don't take care of this reputational concern.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your insights. Our thanks to Joel Rubin, their president of the Washington Strategy Group.